India Currents has been a voice of the community for 25 years. A voice of and a voice for the Indian community. We are rather unique in the sense that 18% of our readers are non-Indians. So the information that we share in a magazine does reach beyond the Indian community. But what we have realized that, especially with recent events that have happened, that perhaps it's incumbent upon organizations like ours to make more effort, to reach audiences beyond our comfort zone, to educate people about our culture, our heritage, our religions, so that we don't appear the other, because it's fear of the other that often drives crime. So it is that thought that drove us to start this venture with the Indian Diaspora Project, where we hope to do a series through the year. This is the first one, where we discuss various aspects of our culture heritage with broader audiences. That's the reason we chose San Jose State, so that we have the opportunity to reach people that would maybe not ordinarily get access to the information that we have. So it is my great pleasure to invite you to the first ever panel discussion hosted by India Currents and the Indian Diaspora Project. Ladies and gentlemen, Building Bridges.
All of you read about, heard about, talked about the incident that took place, unfortunate incident that took place on August 5th in Wisconsin. Several things went wrong. First and foremost, 6 innocent people died, and that tragedy in and of itself is insurmountable. Second thing that went wrong, it happened in a place of worship, a place where you actually expect to be safe, at peace, in communion with the Spirit. And that was not that it would have been any less unfortunate had it happened somewhere else, but it happened in a place of worship. Now, third and fourth are very subtle nuances. There was a fear of otherness that inspired it. And this time around, the fear of otherness was directed towards a sub-community within the Indian diaspora. Secondly, or fourth point therein, is it was somewhat unfortunate, just adding to the prior comment I made, that it was out of confusion that this community is somehow associated with the radical community that has been involved with various terrorist events in the past.
I work with the Sikh Coalition, and the Sikh Coalition is the largest Sikh civil rights organization in the country, and we were actually created on the night of 9/11. So we began hearing about hate crimes incidents that were happening across the country, and as many of you know, the first hate crime post 9/11 was a Sikh man in Arizona. So the organization started off as a voluntary effort of a group of young professionals in New York City who decided to come together, and we started a website where we collected incidences of hate crimes. So I say that all to just emphasize that what happened in Oak Creek was not an isolated incident. Like this type of incidents, these cases have been happening pre-Oak Creek. I wouldn't say that discrimination didn't occur before 9/11 because it did. It's just that post 9/11, the rates of these cases of hate crimes, workplace discrimination, school bullying, and racial and religious profiling were recorded in staggering rates. And so a lot of the work we do is collecting that information and then addressing it with the government officials and agencies. With Oak Creek, I think what we can say is that, yes, the Sikh community is considered the other right now, but a lot of it has to do with a lack of awareness of who we are as a community, and whether or not that burden lies on the Sikh community or on the American community as a whole to educate is a point of discussion. It was an American tragedy that happened, and I think it's really important to consider it an American tragedy. And the Sikhs have been in California and the U.S. for over 100 years now. So we really are part and parcel of American society.
And I want to thank India Currents for putting this together. It's an important discussion, and of course, we want to ensure that the discussion doesn't end here and that there's action taken based upon a lot of the suggestions made by the panelists. And I'm looking forward to continue to hear from the fellow panelists as well. Being here in San Jose, I think it's appropriate that this discussion is happening here, that the first of many, I'm sure, panel discussions happens here we have the largest Gurdwara in the Western Hemisphere here in San Jose. There aren't as many of the attachments and divisions that may have existed historically in India, whether it's interfaith or region or what have you. And so when I meet someone who's South Asian, whether they're Sikh or Muslim, doesn't matter what their religion is, I feel a connection right away, just based upon the fact that we share so much in common. My sister-in-law is Sikh as well, and so I certainly have that family connection. But I think that the more that we can find that common ground, the better off we're going to be. And I think that this panel here demonstrates such a wide diversity amongst the community of how we can help achieve that. And at the end of the day, we have to, the responsibility is certainly on the Sikh community, but it's also on everyone outside the Sikh community. But the reality is we can't expect others to do it if we're not willing to do it ourselves. And so I think that's where we really need to put a great focus on, is to try to find out ways to help educate the community about who we are as Americans, who we are as South Asians, as Indians, as Hindus, as Sikhs. And that really means keeping the doors open, which is something that Gurdwaras ironically do all the time, but we need to let people know that that's the case.
Thank you very much.
Going through the points we were asked to cover, the background of this type of attack, it's, I think, human nature. All of us here who come from India, I'm from India, born there, Sikhs are a minority in India. We all know that in 1984, Sikhs were attacked by mobs in Delhi, and the people who did that and organized it are still walking around and are prominent politicians in India. So we suffer discrimination as a minority community in our home country and throughout the world. So it's not a new thing for us. There are tons of organizations out there who exist to fight ignorance, and it is incumbent upon all of us to maybe take one less hour watching Jersey Shore and maybe one more hour volunteering for educating ourselves about how we can help ourselves, as opposed to waiting for the mainstream white community out there to help us. I know this is probably controversial, but I think we need to protect ourselves. What happens when somebody breaks into your home? Well, I have a burglar alarm on my home, I have video surveillance on my homes, and I have weapons on one of my homes. So I think it's important for all of us to be aware that there is a threat. There's a threat against us. And at a minimum, I think Gurdwaras should have video surveillance. I think that presidents and organizers of Gurdwaras need to have constant communication with law enforcement to have some protocols in place. This is not going to be the last incident, I'm afraid. And those of us who have relatives who work in 7-Elevens and who drive taxis and who are in vulnerable situations and they wear turbans, we're all afraid for them. And I think that they should all be aware of their surroundings, and they should all be aware of how to call 911, where to find their gun, if they believe in that. Ironically, the Sikh religion teaches as a tenet of our faith that we're supposed to be armed at all times. Like the Orthodox Sikh carries a kirpan. Well, a modern weapon is a gun. So I personally, in the wake of the Oak Creek incident, have begun taking weapons training, and I've encouraged other Sikhs around the country to arm themselves.
There has been one traumatic incident that has transformed the community and caused a lot of introspection and finally kind of activism for the Koreans, especially in Southern California, is the Rodney King riots. I think if you talk to Koreans in Southern California, they'll say that post-Rodney King and after Rodney King, the riots, I think the Korean community saw itself differently, saw activism in a different sense than before. I mean, the prejudice continued, but I think the way the Korean community looked at that was different. I think for the Sikh community, I think 9/11 sounds like it's a similar kind of transformative event, where yes, there was prejudice before that and racism towards Sikhs before that, but it took a whole new dimension, a whole new sense of urgency within the community, because those incidents suddenly kind of exploded and expanded and became more serious and more violent. For the Japanese Americans, obviously, they came and there was racism again, but it was World War II, Pearl Harbor. That was a transformative event for the Japanese American community. Everybody was interned. All my relatives, all my aunts and uncles were interned in internment camps, Wyoming being the main one where most of my relatives were at. After that, I think there were leaders in the Japanese American community. They said, okay, we can't let this happen again. What do we do about this? Well, there are people like Ike Ishimatsu, who was a leader in the San Jose Japanese community. After the war, he said, okay, we need to get involved. We need to be seen. We need to be heard. What he did was he went around to different political events and community events, and he made sure that the Japanese community had a table. The Japanese community was there, seen not just within the Japanese community, but the wider community. So then they identified some people that they felt were individuals that they could help groom for political office. And one of those people was Norman Mineta. Another was Michael Honda. So this group of kind of far-sighted Japanese American leaders said, okay, for us to prevent this from happening, we need to be in the game. We need to be part of the process. We need to have an influence on the wider community. We need to be representative so these things don't happen again. That's sort of historical. For my profession, I think, you know, as people mentioned, this is due to ignorance. And I think that's where the newspaper comes in. Newspaper and media in general. I think it's our job to kind of like paint a true picture of everybody, but importantly immigrants, I think, you know, good and bad. Oftentimes, I think media gets kind of focused too much on the bad, the crimes, but I think it's more important for the media to paint a full picture of who these immigrants are. Religious ceremonies, traditions, problems that immigrant communities are facing as their children acculturate, and trying to preserve your traditions and your language in the face of American culture, and sort of combining that and coming forward with kind of a new, for Japanese Americans, Japanese American culture or Indo-American culture, that kind of thing. So that's where I see, that's where the role of the Mercury News and other news organizations are, I think, is we need to make sure that we do paint that full picture of what an immigrant community looks like, what it means, what its hopes and aspirations are.
This lethal tragedy was a wake-up call, not just to the South Asian community, but to the nation, that we are not, despite the rhetoric and despite some of the icons and elected officials that we've seen take office, I'm not talking about Ash, say Obama, that we are somehow in a post-racial America. That we have transcended the historical ills of our past, that the internments, that the segregation, that the type of violence that was happening in the South that were part of American history is behind us and in our rearview mirror. Unfortunately, what Page and what the white supremacist groups are saying is we are current. And in a lot of ways, we have come up with a level of violence and are networked in a way that this country hasn't seen before. And unfortunately, it took such a devastating act of violence to make. I certainly feel the response is to be louder, to be more pronounced. And if isolation is a vulnerability, then I think the direction or the road forward is about a pronounced and integrated community, so that perpetrators see what they otherwise would identify as victims and say that person, that community is part of a larger community that has their back, that they are a part of, that is powerful. And that's why, certainly making sure folks like Dennis and the Mercury News know the larger narrative is important. The fact that the South Asian community, the Sikh community, sees themselves as part of a larger civil rights fabric, and that other communities that have been victims of discrimination also respond accordingly. Those are important. But also, last thing I say is, so is the pronouncement that, say, something like India Currents does. They may not have defined it as this, and maybe they don't, but this is a civil rights publication, because it is about a proud pronouncement of people that are defining themselves by their own terms. That has historical significance. So I'll just leave it there.
Beautiful. Do we have actually any statistics as to what number of Indians or South Asians own guns, or how big a part of our culture in institutions, I mean, like Gurdwaras and temples, is this a norm, or is this even, do you know? I don't know.
So to answer your question about statistics, the answer is no. I'm not aware of any statistics that cover the percentage of the Indian American diaspora population that exercises the Second Amendment right to bear arms. It's a controversy in California, the extent to which one can even do it. In my home county of San Francisco, it's impossible to get a carry permit from the sheriff. In other counties in California, it is possible to get a carry permit from the sheriff. This poses a due process issue that's being challenged in the courts. So I've had a number of Gurdwara activists come to me and ask me about getting a carry permit, weapons training, so I can see anecdotally that there's an increasing interest in that, in protecting themselves. However, anybody who's gone to a Gurdwara knows that carrying a weapon in a Gurdwara is an article of faith. Every Orthodox Sikh carries a kirpan, and so it's not weird or unusual. There aren't, and in fact, those arms are sometimes used. In fact, an arm was used to attack the shooter in Wisconsin, according to the police. He was stabbed with a kirpan, or attempted to be stabbed with a kirpan by one of the victims. And so the reason, and I think this harkens back to Raj's comment, I think that one arms oneself not hopefully to ever have to use that weapon, but to project strength, and I think that's important. So I certainly expect to see more people exercising that right in the light of what's been happening.
I absolutely disagree with encouraging people to get firearms. I think part of the problem we've had is not just in terms of a culture of violence, but allowing those that perpetrate these crimes to have full reign in getting weapons that are not designed for home protection and not designed for hunting. The fact is, since 2004, when the Brady bill elapsed, there's essentially no limit in most states of these high magazine rounds, where in the shooter in Wisconsin, and in one of the recent shootings, Wisconsin and Colorado, Arizona, with the congresswoman in Virginia Tech, the weapon of choice is an automatic handgun that can fire rounds as fast as a round a second. And these these magazines that can hold as many as 100 rounds, when police officers have magazines that hold about 10.
We have, besides the fact that we have a right to own weapons or not to own weapons, we have one very, very important attribute that most people who come from the Indian diaspora have, and that is we are educated. We are all highly, highly educated. We can use our voice. We don't choose to, most often. How can we empower our community to use this education and to use our voice far more frequently? Each one of us can get out there and give a lecture. Let it be to somebody whom we find.
The proactive mean can only be through specificity and through communication. The reactive mean can be both, but the proactive mean, which is long-term, the prescriptive and predictive I talked about, can only be pacifist, by definition.
In public schools especially, I see so much opportunity for all that we're talking about here, because in all these years that I've been in public schools, I have not seen a single assembly where a group, say from the Sikh coalition, or somebody has come and given an assembly about what it means to be Sikh, what it means to be Indian, what it means to wear a bindi. Something like that. When we have gay and lesbian people come and give assemblies, we have blood cancer, all kinds of cancer people come in and give assemblies. We have all kinds of people who come and give assemblies. But why aren't we having assemblies on inclusion?
Terry is very kind enough to be with us from Palo Alto. He has a complimentary statement, I believe.
I do. Terry Gleason from All Saints, Palo Alto. What do we do next? How do we build this? Not just simply, I know who that guy is with the turban. I know what he is, but okay, we have this knowledge. We've explained it. We have this great affection now for one another, and respect and trust.
Mike, you've been involved with the Ajit Singh Sikh community. I'd love for you to comment on what Pastor Terry just built up.
I wasn't aware that I was going to be contributing in this way until I showed up, so forgive me if I'm a little unprepared. But my introduction to the Sikh community was as chairman of the Planning Commission in Athabasca County. And the Gurdwara in El Sobrante was looking to expand, basically add buildings and worship space and the rest. And the community had some folks in it who were just flat out stupid, but that's, I guess, less than kind. But they simply were reacting to seeing people who dressed differently and spoke differently, and the Gurdwara didn't look like a church that they're used to seeing. The things that this experience brought out. Number one is the Sikh community was the best possible kind of client for us, in that everybody was open, very professional, and made the best possible case to the community. I mean, open, just I couldn't ask for more in trying to advocate, on behalf of the Gurdwara. And so we ended up building the community acceptance. The Gurdwara got approval. We still had half a dozen people who couldn't get past, guys looking different than they're used to. But at the end of the day, they had the entire county government basically behind what they wanted to do, which was entirely reasonable and within the law and asked for in a reasonable manner. But the experience kind of, informed me as to what I would suggest the Sikh community consider doing. And what I would suggest is that as a community, you hold the rest of the community to our standards. I mean, Americans say we believe in certain things. We believe in freedom of religion. We believe people should be judged on their character. Hold us accountable. I mean, I guess I'm the representative of the white guys here, I guess, referred to elsewhere, and I'm not from Australia, and I don't play cricket, so I don't know how that all works in. But our communities will support, in our sub-community.
You were on ground zero in Wisconsin literally hours after the incident. Dinesh is in the audience as well, represents Associated Press. Love to hear your thoughts.
I grew up in the Bay Area, but I've been living in Wisconsin for the last 7 years, working as a reporter for the Associated Press. My office is about 30 minutes from the Oak Creek Temple, so we were the ones who got the call Sunday morning when the shooting happened, and we were the first ones out there. By the time we got there, they had already had the caution tape all around the temple. We couldn't get that close. The SWAT teams were still out there. The police were still doing their thing. There was all sorts of confusion. So we were gathered in a parking lot where families of the victims and families of the worshipers were. They didn't know what was going on either. The community there generally keeps to itself, and their attitude was always, if we just do our thing and we don't bother people, no one's going to bother us. But the consequence of that was when something like this happened, there was a little bit of uncertainty. People weren't really sure how to get involved, or whether there was some cultural concerns about, I know what would happen if something like this happened in my church, and I know I would donate food, I know I would donate this and donate that. Do we do anything differently here? Do these people, would they eat the same food that we provide? Do they, what do we do? So I won't belabor that point because folks here have already mentioned the benefit of getting out and mingling with the community and helping them understand what Sikhism is, and that Sikhs, Hindus aren't really different from anyone else when it comes down to the basic circumstances. The main thing that I would say is, in terms of what I talked about before with them sort of being insular and saying, we're just going to stick to ourselves, what they've started to do since then is to try to integrate themselves more in the community. But what I've noticed is it's still sort of a, here's what we people do, and the way the local media presents it is, here's what those people do. Those Sikhs have these certain customs. Those people celebrate holidays in this specific way. But at the end of it, even if someone watches that news coverage, there's still a sense of, okay, that's what those people do. But there's still a sense of us and them. And my humble opinion is what might help to advance the cause a little bit more is more a sense of integration.
I'll add to that a little bit. I think it is important that for the press to include people in stories, so that when you have a story and you quote somebody, you're quoting somebody just because they have an opinion, not because they're Sikh or Hindu or Buddhist or whatever. So I think it's up to the press to kind of look for that diversity of opinion and not go back to the same people that we always do sometimes and to quote this or that. So it's important. So it's nice to see in a story about maybe shopping, you see somebody who's quoted who has a different name, so rather than, and that's how I think what you're getting at is that you have to be out, you have to be involved. So if you're involved in school activities or a political campaign or an athlete or whatever, I mean, so you have representatives in different fields who are being quoted or being shown just because they're involved in this activity or whatever, not because of they represent a certain community, right? So I think that's the goal, is to show everybody participating in activities because they're Americans or not because of where they came from.
Thank you. Raj, you wanted to add to that?
I just had a follow-up question based on this conversation. Part of it is with the question, what do we do? There's a certain intentionality of how you could sort of envision a strategy and go after it, and organizations and civic community can do things about it. The flip side of the coin is there's an inevitability of communities doing what they're doing with others. And it just happens with generations and stories, people's narrative gets told that way. But we have a number of San Jose State students, one met at the coffee area back there. And I haven't been on the college campus in a long time. So I guess I was curious from the college students, what happened in Wisconsin, how did that get interpreted, or what's it like being Sikh or South Asian?
I feel it's a very diversified community, so in classrooms, we're treated equally as anyone else. So I don't feel there's like a need over here. But out of this community, as you guys are saying, in Wisconsin or like in other communities like in the Midwest, there would be a difference, like we would be treated different. So I'm just saying on this campus, there's not an issue. Teachers treat every student the way the students should be.
There is a question, Simran, I'm going to direct it towards you, and if needed, I'll step in to help you. It's potentially a controversial question. What does it take for one to become a Sikh, and why it is necessary to wear a turban in 21st century? Are we not dividing the community, and at the same time while trying to unite a smaller faction by creating a separate identity? So there's several nuances, and Simran, I'd let you take a first stab at the question.
Sure. I mean, I think if we're going to live in any country, living in America and being able to practice your faith fearlessly, this is a country to be able to do that. To be a Sikh, I mean, obviously I'm not going to go into it in detail, but the Sikh Code of Conduct defines being a Sikh as somebody who believes in the Guru Granth Sahib, which is our holy scripture. The identity of the turban came around in 1699 when the 10th Guru, Guru Gobind Singh Ji, basically gave us an identity. It came around at a time when people were being persecuted, and individuals within the community needed to we needed an identity. And I think, as Harmeet had said, in India we do continue to struggle to be a minority, and Sikhs wanted autonomy and they wanted to be considered a distinct identity. And so I think the turban came around at a time when that was needed. I strongly believe in individuals being able to practice their faith however they choose to practice it. This is our history, and I don't think we need to be asking, apologetic about how we look or how we chose.
Are we using social media to engage younger people to understand, in a fun and informed way, the cultural diversity better? In parentheses, hangama style.
Yes. I guess in my middle-aged generation, if I go to a party, an older person might say, "So you're from India, nice name," and then they think about it for a second, and there's usually one or three responses. I like curry. Do you know Dr. Singh? I admire Mahatma Gandhi. Those are the sort of the old school ways of perceiving what is Indian. But the younger people are more sophisticated. My mother did make a point in that racist community that I lived in to go with her Vindi and her sari and explain to the other school children in our public school what is a Sikh, why does my brother wear a patka. And I think that does happen quite a bit. And so those of us who use Facebook frequently, like I think Ash is probably doing right now. I know he's a veteran user of Facebook, and my friend on Facebook.
Hi, I'm Dinavaz. I'm also from India. My comment was essentially this. I got the sense from several panelists that a louder dialogue needs to be engaged in. My concern with that is it possible that a louder dialogue from several minority groups might just result in a lot of noise and therefore resulting in people kind of blocking it out or less attention paid to serious issues?
The risk of having noise is better than having no one speaking up at all.
Yep.
I mean, I'm a litigator. I go into court and fight every day. I sued the state of California for a 4-year lawsuit to try to get them to hire a Sikh as a prison guard, and it was an Indian American on the other side of that debate. I had the Attorney General Kamala Harris, and settled that case last year. So I'm a big advocate of being loud and being proud and asserting your rights.
And I think with the Sikh Coalition, we've realized that to be successful, you have to be involved in coalition building. So you have to work with other organizations, the ADL, the ACLU, other civil rights organizations, and other groups to get any kind of message across.
I think we could honor the more intimate connections that are happening, that are crossing and building bridges. You know, I remember thinking about, after the event in Wisconsin, I work with a group in East Palo Alto that's mainly Latino, but has some Sikh youth in it too. And, you know, I always wondered how they were going to respond collectively as a group. Not the Sikhs, not the Latinos, but collectively as an organization that grew up together in a particular neighborhood. And they responded through their personal experience, that it sort of transcended whatever artificial divides was created for them. And not to give another cheap plug to Indian Currents, but we have a piece written by a Mexican immigrant in this issue, October issue, who recently, in Sunnyvale, recently came from Mexico. And he's an adult now, and he wrote this story about how they all spoke Spanish in his neighborhood, in his apartment. And the person that he connected with, that drew him out of his family and went beyond just his initial scope of a Spanish-speaking community, was the Sikh ice cream driver that went to his house and would give him a discount or a free ice cream. And that's how, and he grew up getting this free ice cream. And he exchanged this dialogue, and both had a limited English at the time, where he said, "Why do you give me free ice cream?" And the South Asian ice cream driver said, if you knew where I'm from, I just gave you the world. And just to say that we both had this common experience of coming from a place with little resource, and there's a unity of experience there that can transcend. So to honor the intimate connections as well as the large, loud noise option. Perfect.
I'll just say that, you know, I think events like this, I think, help promote more understanding. I think, and I think the Indian community, the Sikh community needs more of this kind of dialogue and more trying to figure out, what do we do? How do we fit in? How can we have our voice heard? Unfortunately, in the newspaper business, because we have fewer resources, we have fewer people who are able to go out in the community. So I think we rely a lot more these days on people calling us with tips about what's going on. And so call us. I mean, we may not respond every time, or we may not respond a majority of the time, but hopefully we can respond and do stories about, as I said earlier, not just Sikh events or Hindu events or anything, but we'll have that diversity of opinion and representation and stories we do every day. And I think that's kind of the most important thing, where people show up in stories just because they have a certain opinion, not who necessarily where they came from, what community they represent.
Thank you, Dennis.
Again, doing a story about building bridges.
Sure.
Thank you. Thanks for asking the question.
You've got to ask.
Okay.
Harmeet.
Yeah, well, what I want to say is that I think what we're doing here in this room is important and useful, but we're preaching to the choir here, so nobody should feel too self-congratulatory about spending an hour among people who share their views. That's not really challenging, and it doesn't really move the ball at all, okay? So what I think is hard and what I think is necessary is for, what Ash does. It's hard to go walk precincts and knock on a door and ask a stranger to vote for you. Your name is different, your religion is different. I think it's important in society that as a diaspora community, we do the same as every other diaspora community and achieve our true power in the political system. I think that's really critical. Irish Americans, German Americans, Polish Americans, Chinese Americans, Vietnamese Americans, Japanese Americans, Korean Americans, they've all gone through these steps of evolution, and they didn't really get the power, and they weren't really able to go to Sacramento or Washington or San Jose and change the law and understand and get people hired in those communities as sheriffs or police or whatever until they had the power to affect those levers of change. So it's not enough to contribute money to Obama or Romney or whoever or whatever it is. I think it's important that each of us do our best to take some of those harder challenges to ask for what is our right in our society and not just hope for the crumbs that fall to us by the beneficial majority.
Thank you. I think Ruth's right on. We have to practice what we preach. There's been a lot of well-intentioned preaching today. We have to put that into action. And in addition to being in an elected office, we have now, we're seeing us going into media, going into social justice organizations, and that's critically important. And issues like just educating the public, whether it's textbook reform or all these issues, we need to be very much engaged in when you have certain school districts that want to get rid of ethnic studies, which really is a pseudonym for them wanting to have just European American account of history. And that is our responsibility. But more importantly, we must continue to invite others into our home, into our mosques, into our Gurdwaras, into our temples. But we have to take it a step further, because being well educated does not mean you're well informed. There are a lot of people in the Indian community, just within the Indian community themselves, have prejudices towards each other, whether it's based on faith or region. You go beyond that, there's a lot of prejudice in the Indian community towards Latinos, African Americans, you name it. And we have to be just as concerned about issues that affect others as we are about issues that affect us. Whether it's the disparity of the jail population amongst Latinos and African Americans, whether it's the fact that the technology sector here in Silicon Valley is not representative of our community, what we can do as those that have been able to be successful, what can we do to go back in our own backyards? In the school district that I went to, right here in San Jose, where there's an extraordinarily high number of dropouts among Latinos and African Americans, what can we do to make sure they share in the prosperity that we're benefiting from? What can we do to ensure that all communities have marriage equality, and why it's relevant to the LGBT community, and so on, that we need to educate ourselves on other communities as well. We need to know more about other religions as well, as we're asking others to know more about ours. And so that, I think, really, it just comes down to loving each other and practicing that love every day in every way that we can, and taking this dialogue here today and practicing it in our everyday lives, to not just do it out of generosity, as Ajit had mentioned earlier, but do it out of true curiosity and a true desire to bring our community together so that we'll be loved as much as we love others.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think I just want to emphasize what's already been said about the importance of our communities engaging. So engaging in government, engaging with the media. It's important for us to be part of the democratic process. So unless we're participating in the democratic process, our voices are not going to be heard, and policies are going to be created that ignore our voice. And so we need to continue to do that. Regarding the comments about integration is really important, but not at the extent where you're losing who you are or who we are as the people. And I think it's very powerful that Harmeet is running as a Sikh American woman. She identifies as a Sikh, and she can still be as, I think, effective, but still being able to do that. So I think we shouldn't be afraid to be who we are, to practice the faith that we have, and belong to the culture that we belong to.
So a quick word of thanks. First and foremost, I'd like to thank everyone in the audience who came. I know time is precious. It's an important cause. Thanks for your time, your contribution, your comments. I'd like to thank each of the panelists. Extremely diverse, very well thought out views, very apropos. I would like to thank India Currents, obviously, Vandana, Vijay, Jaya, and Shabri on representing
recognize Mr. Jha, who's come from the Consulate General's office. So we are honored to have you here. We have a small token of our appreciation. And I also wanted to say, our effort here is not to really preach to the choir. I do understand that. But to start a dialogue, we have to start somewhere. And so this is a start. And our effort is going to be, I understand, I've got a lot of valuable input, and I think we have to put into motion some of these things, participating at a larger level. Each one of us can do that. You know, you can participate in the Rotary Club, the YMCA, your PTA, there are so many opportunities for us to educate people in our sphere. So I'm going back energized. I think there are some great ideas, and I'm very grateful to all of you for coming here and being a part of our first panel discussion. We do plan to have maybe 3 or 4 in a year. We'll be discussing this with Shelby. A small token of our appreciation. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.